with that amazing charge, we're going to begin to answer the questions that have been put before us. And to do that, I want to first welcome Sarah Hurwitz, former White House speechwriter and best-selling author in the Jewish community, Richard Marceau, former Canadian MP and Vice President of CIJA in Canada, and Dr. Micah Goodman, leading Israeli philosopher and public intellectual. So we all agreed that you've got the bios on the apps and that you could read them, and we want to get right to it. So we've all, I think the word of the GA has already become inflection point. We're all at this inflection point. We've all lived these same experiences over the last 2 years, except the three of you have lived it in different countries. Sarah in the United States, Richard in Canada, and Micah in Israel. So I'd like you to take this opening segment, and I'm going to ask each of you, I'm going to give you each time to answer this question for the audience. I think we all have some experiences of the places where we were, but we're not sure what it's been like in the other countries. So would each of you not just address those who know what you're talking about, but address the rest of us and tell us what it's been like in the United States, in Canada, and Micah, I'm going to start with you. Tell us what it's been like in Israel.
The French have this tendency to divide their history into 5 periods. The second is French Republic, the third French Republic, now they're the fifth French Republic. If we consider and investigate Israel's history through those lenses, so I think we would all agree, Israel, till now, we've had 2 Israeli republics. The first Israeli republic was between 1948 to 1977. That was the first Israeli republic. The second Israeli republic was between 1977, and I think we're still in the second Israeli republic. The first Israeli republic was founded by David Ben-Gurion. The second, 77, by who? Menachem Begin. The first Israeli, and they're very different versions of Israel. The first Israeli republic, the ethos was socialism. The second Israeli republic, the ethos was capitalism. The pride of the first republic was the kibbutz. The pride of the second Israeli republic is the startup nation. The first Israeli republic was very secular. The second is more traditional. The first is very Ashkenazi. The second is more diverse, more Mizrahi involved. What was the moment that put an end to the first Israeli republic and gave birth to the process that led to the foundation of the second Israeli republic? The Yom Kippur War. Now, the Yom Kippur War has a pattern, has a structure. It starts with the failure of the intelligence community that led to a surprise attack, that led to the army in the beginning, especially the Air Force, not functioning in the first 48 hours of the war. Then there was shock and panic. Moshe Dayan famously, and this is the third day of the war, holds his head and says, Churban habayit hashlishi, meaning the state of Israel is going down. He was afraid of that. And then there was recovery. Massive, impressive recovery that led to a tremendous victory in the north. The IDF pushed the Syrians out of the Golan Heights and then entered Syria. And that was in the north. In the south, it's more ambivalent. An ambivalent victory in the south. The Egyptians had forces in Sinai in the end of the war, but we had our forces led by Arik Sharon on the other side of the Suez Canal. I hope you're hearing what happened here. Because 50 years and 1 day later, that pattern repeated itself. Just with one difference. Everything was on steroids. Everything was bigger. The failure of the intelligence community was a greater failure. The surprise was a greater surprise. The dysfunctionality of the Israeli military in the first 24, 48 hours, especially the Air Force, was greater. But also, the recovery was more impressive. And in the north, pagers, Hezbollah, Syria, massive, absolute victory in the north. In the south, ambivalent victory. We've just relived the pattern, the structure of the Yom Kippur War with one difference. It was stronger, it was bigger, everything on steroids. Here's my question. The Yom Kippur War was an earthquake in Israel. It shaked Israel. Israelis changed. It put an end to the first Israeli Republic, and it created a chain of events that led to the birth of the second Israeli Republic. This war, which is greater than the Yom Kippur War, is an earthquake in Israel. It's changing Israel. It's transforming Israel. And our job and our mission is for this moment to lead to the birth of the third Israeli Republic. The Israelis that will form the third Israeli Republic are the Israelis, this great generation, that were witnessing October 7th. And they saw at that moment of October 7th, when the state of Israel didn't protect its civilians, didn't save its citizens. And at that moment, this generation stood up. And when Israel didn't save Israelis, Israelis saved Israel. That's the generation. And I want to share with you, and with this I'll end, because this is something that North American Jews have to understand. A new temperament being born in Israel, growing in Israel. A new awareness is growing in Israel among this young, great generation. And that is, this generation doesn't feel that it's the inheritors of the project called Israel. They are the founders. They are the founding fathers and mothers of the third Israeli Republic. Thank you.
Thank you, Micah. Richard, especially sitting south of the border, it's been very hard to know what to make of what has been happening in Canada these last 2 years and where it is today relative to the respect to the Jewish community. What are your thoughts?
So thank you for having us. Micah said that October 7th changed Israel. I think it changed Canadian Jewry as well. 4 points, briefly. One is the fact that, a primer on Canadian Jewry. It is the third biggest diaspora community in the world after the US and in Israel. But yet we're 400,000 people out of 43 million Canadians. So we're less than 1%. So strong diaspora community, and yet relatively small compared to Canada. Two, the Canadian Jewish community, Canada is a product of compromise. First between French and the English, and you can hear from my accent and my weird turns of phrases where I stand on that divide. But then after wave of immigration, we went from biculturalism to multiculturalism. And it allowed Canadian Jews to flourish. There was never pressure for Canadian Jews to choose between a strong Jewish identity and a strong Canadian identity. And it allowed Jews to build strong institutions. It allowed Jews to have a high level of cohesiveness. The level of intermarriage is relatively low. The mastery of Hebrew is high. Eight out of 10 Canadians have visited Israel. More than 90% of Canadians believe in the rights of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. So Canadian Jews have a strong Jewish identity, a strong Canadian identity, and there was never a pressure to choose between those two. And yet, October 7 changed us. For the first time in generations, Canadian Jews have felt othered. Synagogues have been firebombed. Jewish schools have been shot at. Jewish activities on campus have been invaded by rioters. And this is day after day after day. And some say that the promise of Canada has been broken. There's a lot of work to do.
Sarah, you get to represent the largest diaspora Jewish community in the world. What are your thoughts?
So, I think that since October 7th, but really before then, there have been huge shifts in America on how people think about Jews and Israel. And I think that is especially true of young people. So we are now wrestling with a new, generational divide here. And I think that's particularly true in that social media is now our source of media. And this, it used to be that the media you got in America was American media, and it was pretty mainstream. It generally didn't express extreme anti-Israel views. You had to go to a pretty weird bookstore to find global media and fringe media. But today we have social media, which is a global medium, right? It is shaped, its algorithms are shaped by billions of people worldwide who don't really love Jews. And so while in the 1990s, a young person probably wasn't going to find Al Jazeera or someone like Nick Fuentes, today those media outlets find them. They find them on their phones. It's also this increasingly post-literate media, less and less text, more and more videos. So you have TikTok just smashing our young people's brains all day long with video of carnage in Gaza. And this is why so many of us can't have a sane conversation with younger Jews, because anything that we try to say to them, they are hearing it through this wall of carnage. So I want to give data and information and facts and arguments, and they are just seeing in their minds carnage, and I sound obscene. And I think, unfortunately, the very smart, bet that we made on Holocaust education to serve as anti-Semitism education, in this new media environment, I think that is beginning to break down a little bit. Because Holocaust education is absolutely essential, but I think it may be confusing some of our young people about anti-Semitism because they learn about big, strong Nazis hurting weak, emaciated Jews. And they think, oh, anti-Semitism is like anti-black racism, right? Powerful white people against powerless black people. So when on TikTok all day long they see powerful Israelis hurting weak, skinny Palestinians, it's not surprising that they think, oh, I know, the lesson of the Holocaust is you fight Israel. You fight the big, powerful people hurting the weak people. That's not how the Holocaust happened, right? We all know that. We know that it happened because the Germans insisted that the Jews, 1% of the population, were responsible for all their problems, just like people insist that Israel, the size of New Jersey, is responsible for all the world's problems today. But that's not really what you take away from Holocaust education. You take away the images of power, powerless. And you also don't really learn about Islamist anti-Semitism and Soviet anti-Zionism, which is so much of what I'm seeing, especially on campus with young people today. And I think that zooming back right now, I think American Jews are kind of wrestling with a category that our ancestors in Europe made 250 years ago, where as we transitioned to modern nation states and they wanted to get secular jobs, go to secular universities, they kind of had to reimagine Judaism to fit in. Right? You couldn't just be a Jew. You needed to be like a French person of the Jewish persuasion, a German of the Jewish faith. So we kind of reimagined Judaism as a Protestant-style religion, which, look, it worked really well for us, 250 years, very successful. The problem is we're not just a religion, right? We can all reject every aspect of Jewish religion. We're still Jews, nor are we a race or an ethnicity. Jews are all different races and ethnicities. We are a nation, civilization, tribe, peoplehood, but most of all, we're a family. And so if you are a young person raised in America who thinks Judaism is a Protestant-style religion, then the 7 million Jews in Israel are merely your co-religionists. So if my co-religionists, I look at them, and if they're not practicing my religion of social justice and certain prophetic values, then what do I have to do with them? It would be like telling a mainline, very progressive Protestant in Berkeley, California, you have to care about that Pentecostal in Brazil. It doesn't make sense. But that's a category error, right? The 7 million people in Israel, they are not my co-religionists, they are my siblings. But I think if you think of them as merely your co-religionists, it's very easy to slide into anti-Zionism. You don't necessarily have that connection to them. And I have to say, I think to conclude, it's becoming increasingly clear that the kind of contentless, bagel and lox, Jewish mother joke identity that many American Jews have, it just doesn't cut it anymore. When your Jewish identity is a big empty void with a few ethnic jokes rattling around in it, it will be filled by what is around you. And if what is around you is anti-Semitism, you will be helpless to fight back. If someone tells you that the Jewish God is violent and vengeful and Judaism is a legalistic, unloving religion, and you know nothing about Jewish tradition, what will you say? Tikkun olam? It's not a great answer. If they say that Israel is a genocidal, racist state, and you know nothing about Jewish history or Israel, we're going to be like, I like Seinfeld. It doesn't work. We need to know our Jewish story in a way that when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, I didn't really. I could get away with that identity. Young people who have that empty Jewish identity today, it is being filled by anti-Semitism, and we need to give them the content to protect them.
So I love this panel, not only because they're all so smart, but they're actual rule followers. You answered the question that I asked you, reflecting on the countries in which you live. Now I want to ask you the opposite question. Is there a common narrative among the global Jewish people that is emerging, or, as some have argued, are we growing farther apart? Who wants to go first?
Me and Sarah had this conversation behind the scenes. Maybe.
Share it with us.
Okay. It seems to me now this is a very Israeli-centric perspective, if that's a word. And that is, it seems to be Israel is standing in front of a historic opportunity. That doesn't mean we're going to grab the opportunity. It doesn't mean we're going to rise with the opportunity. But there's a big opportunity. American Jewry seems like, and I understand also Canadian Jewry seems like, they're standing in front of a massive crisis. It doesn't mean they'll collapse. But there's a crisis here, and there's a great crisis in Israel, obviously, but there's also an opportunity. And I want to explain something about the opportunity in Israel today. The Israelis that Israel didn't save them, but they saved Israel. That generation, that great generation, their awareness looks like this. When they looked at the top, at Israel shel Mala, how do you translate that? Israel from above. The systems from above. They see something lazy, dysfunctional, and many times corrupt. When they look at the bottom, at grassroots Israel, the fighters, the warriors, the NGOs, they see something else. If from the top we see division, at the bottom we see unity. From the top we see egoism, like I come before me. For them it's country first, it's altruism. We see a great generation. Now the opportunity is like this. Here's a question in Israel right now, after this war, we're in a juncture in history, and here's the question. Is everything that's not healthy on the top, will it trickle down to the bottom? That's possible. That could happen. We see that happening. But there's an alternative, that what's healthy in the bottom will make it up to the top. That's also a possibility. That's the opportunity. This great generation is the opportunity. It won't become overnight. The Third Israeli Republic won't be born within a year. It took, by the way, after Yom Kippur, how many years did it take for the Second Israeli Republic to be born? 4 years. It's a process. But that's the opportunity we need to invest in Israel. We have a shared challenge. American Jews have to face this crisis. Israeli Jews, if they won't grab the opportunity, there'll be an even deeper crisis.
So I think he was pointing at you when he said we have a shared crisis, Sarah. Is there a shared solution?
You know, it's funny, I do think so. And I was actually speaking to a bunch of Israelis explaining my theory about, in the 1800s in Europe, we kind of ripped the beating heart out of Judaism in order to become more like Christians. So all of our post-biblical texts, which contain 2,500 years of our profound, radical, transformational wisdom. And this Israeli kept interrupting me. And he was like, that happened to us too. I'm like, no, it didn't. Shh. And he's like, no, that happened to us too. I'm like, stop. And then I realized, actually, if you read the early anti-Zionist thinkers, they're very similar to the reformers in their disdain for Jewish religion, for this sort of superstitious rabbis getting us in trouble. Ugh, leave this behind, right? We're forming a new kind of Jew. And as soon as I made that connection, I thought, we've both had this tragedy of transitioning to modernity, which is the loss of our texts, the loss of what Amos Oz and Fania Al-Salzberger call our text line. Mm-hmm. They say ours is not a bloodline, it is a text line. And I actually think this is part of the solution. This is something that every Jew on the planet shares. Our texts, our wisdom, no matter how you are practicing, we are all practicing from this body of knowledge. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity to mine that substance, to return to that substance, to find that wisdom, to enrich not just ourselves, but the world. That has always been our value proposition. I mean, you're welcome for democracy, human rights, the idea that all human beings are in the divine image. These are the great ideas that Jewish tradition has offered the world. And I think returning to our text and our substance is something that can unite us all as Jews and will be good not just for us, but for humanity.
So Micah, yes, a crisis in Canada. And yet, let me tell you what I see. I see for the first time Jewish union members and saying, you know what? I see this toxicity in unions and we're going to organize and going to fight back from the inside. I'm seeing Jewish parents fighting anti-Semitism at the school board levels and say, you know what, we're going to do it ourselves and we're going to get elected at the parents' councils. We're seeing Jewish lawyers saying, you know what, there's so much stuff we can do. We have so much knowledge and we're going to organize and we're going to fight back. I'm seeing Jewish doctors and we're seeing bizarrely so much anti-Semitism in the medical profession and saying, you know what, we're going to organize. And what I'm asking Federation, because in Canada the Federation is really the cornerstone of our Jewish organization life, asking, this is the Canadian delegation, by the way. They're saying, we don't want you to do the job for us. To quote Churchill, give us the tool and we will not finish the job, but do the job. And that is an amazing change. And that, despite the crisis, and despite the fact that 70% of religiously motivated hate crimes in Canada target Jews, that gives me hope because Jews are rolling up their sleeves and saying, we will not let them win. This is our country. This is our society. We belong here.
So, listening to you, Micah, did you want to add something to that point? No.
I want to think out loud, but about,
Okay,
about your
I'm going to jump in there. Listen,
Okay. Go for it.
I was thinking at the beginning how lucky the audience is to have you on the panel. But in this last round of questions, I'm thinking about how lucky you are to have this audience. These are the leaders of all across North America and Israel sitting here who already know each other. They work together in common cause to address the issues and the challenges of the day. And they're going to be here the next 2 days, and they're going to think about whatever it is that you tell them they should be thinking about and they need to work on. What is your advice about how we can individually and collectively work together to address the challenges or meet the opportunity that you've all described that we have for the global Jewish people? Now you can go, Micah.
Zionism was an idea of Theodor Herzl saying, he saw the idea of nationalism in Europe. He saw that idea of the family of nations. It's a universal idea. He saw the problem of anti-Semitism and he said, hey, that's a universal solution for a Jewish problem. That was Zionism. Marrying a European idea, a universal idea to solve a Jewish problem. I think the next generation of Zionism is the other way around. The next generation of Jewish conversation needs to be the other way around. Not how do we find universal solutions for Jewish problems, but how do we find Jewish solutions for universal problems? And God knows we have problems. And the number one problem the world is suffering from today, I want to argue, is political polarization. Political polarization, by the way, it's a bigger problem than global warming because we can't solve global warming if we don't live in the same reality, if we can't work together. By the way, we can't solve any problem if we can't work together, which means that political polarization is the source, is the mother and father of all problems today. And how do you heal political polarization? The alchemy of moving from fighting to arguing. You know who developed that technology of that? Moving from arguing to, from fighting to arguing, that was the Talmud. That was Jewish innovation. In the Second Temple, the sects were fighting with each other. Yochanan ben Zakkai, the sages, they create the Mishnah, the Talmud. That was a process of healing polarization. That could be, if we could understand that number one problem of the world is polarization, that is a universal problem that has a Jewish solution. And by the way, it would be helpful if Jews in Israel will practice the Talmudic.
A couple of years ago, I was reading about that Supreme Court case where the football coach was praying with his football players, Christian players, on the 50-yard line. And the Supreme Court actually held in favor of the coach. They said that was fine. And my first reaction was, good. And then I was like, oh God, no, that's not good. But I was actually imagining a Jewish kid standing separately, watching his classmates all praying to Jesus, and just knowing, like, nope, that's not what I do. And I don't want that kid to feel bad. I don't want a Muslim or Hindu or atheist kid to feel bad. And at the same time, I think that to be a Jew is to be different. And to be different is to be uncomfortable. And comfort is really not the core mission in the world for Jews. The core Jewish mission in the world is to create a society that is the exact opposite of ancient Egypt. That's our mission. We've been doing it for thousands of years now. And I think that we in America have focused so much on comfort. Of course we have, which I want everyone to be comfortable in this country. I want no one to feel like a guest. It's all our country. And you know what? I don't think feeling uncomfortable at the 50-yard line is the worst thing, because to be a Jew is to be different. And I think leaning into our difference, embracing our difference, our values, our wisdom, I think if that makes us a little bit uncomfortable, that's not really the worst thing in the world.
Wow. Tough acts to follow. Eric, we can organize, we can mobilize, we can advocate. Yes, but nothing can replace Jews with our heads held high, buttressed by our sense of Jewish values, informed by our Jewish tradition, as both of my co-panelists said, and knowing that we have in our toolbox every single tool we need to face every challenge that is in front of us, and to make sure that the Jewish future is healthy in Israel and in North America.
I just want to say that you are lucky to have this audience, because if there's any audience that understands why we need unity over polarization and why we need to respect the arguments of both sides, it is this audience. You already saw it on the stage earlier this evening with Scott Jennings and Rahm Emanuel. You're going to see it in the plenaries that are going to come up and all of the featured sessions. This is the place where we can begin to end that polarization and begin to build the future that the three of you have all described. Please join me in thanking Richard Marceau, Micah Goodman, and Sarah Hurwitz.